Welcome back. As I teased, it's been quite the day of drama, very soap opera-like, if you will, in the Panama Paul Manafort trial, with a protege throwing his longtime patron under the bus. President Trump's deputy campaign chief, Rick Gates, is the prosecution's star witness. And he spent today detailing, sometimes tediously, how he and Manafort committed these financial crimes. Gates testified how Manafort directed him to lie about his income and fake company records. Now, Manafort's defense team is now in the middle of cross-examining Gates, and they're trying to convince jurors that Gates, who's cooperating with prosecutors to reduce some prison time, can't be trusted. And so for the first time at this trial, we've also heard President Trump's name come up. The campaign came up. Why? Because the jury saw some evidence that Manafort tried to leverage his connections on the Trump transition, a.k.a. his friendship with Rick Gates, to curry favors with one of his lenders. So joining us now, NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams. He's outside the courthouse and currently dry, I think. And Mimi Rocah, former assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York and an MSNBC legal analyst. And I think she gets to stay dry by contract. Anyway, Pete, let me start with you. We've had the rainstorms. We're in between them. Describe Gates. First of all, right now, we know Gates is being cross-examined. But in the hours of the prosecution, if you were to say what was probably the most damning testimony he gave as far as the prosecution is concerned?
Well, it's clearly the fact that Paul Manafort, he says, told him not to tell the accountants what accounts they had in Cyprus that Manafort was using to pay his bills. Don't tell the accountants, he said, because that would just make more of an income appear on his taxes and he'd have to owe more in taxes. He also said that he falsified several documents and emails to help Manafort get bank loans. So remember, 3 sets of charges here: falsifying tax returns, not reporting foreign bank accounts, and then using fraud to get bank loans when the money dried up from Ukraine to try to get more cash out of the properties that he had bought. So what what Gates did today is exactly what the prosecutors hoped. This is a financial crimes case. It's built largely on paper, tax returns, bank statements. Gates is the one who helped those come alive, and that's what the prosecutors hoped he did today.
There seem to be 2 damning pieces of evidence, 2 emails. One I want to put up here. It's Paul Manafort's reaction to his tax projection. The email goes, WTF. How could I be blindsided by this? That's then apparently leads him to ask Gates to falsely reclassify some of the income as debt, and it magically saves Manafort $500,000. Pete, how much attention was the jury paying during? I mean, could you feel as if they were like totally focused in and taking this down point by point?
Well, remember, they've heard about this twice before. They've heard about this from the accountants who were involved in the various stages. They've seen other emails from the bankers. So this is 2014. This is when the money from Ukraine is starting to dry up after the Viktor Yanukovych, whom Manafort had earned millions doing political consulting for, after he gets booted out of office. Then Gates tells him what the taxes are, and that's when Manafort says, oh, I didn't see that one coming. This is a disaster. And so basically what Gates said is that he helped the accountants fudge the information that was used to get a bank loan.
Now we've had the cross-examination, and I guess the biggest shock and awe of that is the defense got Rick Gates to admit he embezzled money from the firm in order to keep a romantic hideaway in London. Do I have this right?
Well, so Gates has already said this. Remember, this is his 2nd day on the stand. He's already admitted that he embezzled money from Manafort. The jury heard about that yesterday. Today, they heard the sort of gory details about how he did it, how many times he did it. They showed emails, they showed statements, so they were trying to nail down the evidence on that. But today, we heard for the first time, as the defense ripped into him to basically say, why should the jury believe you They said that he lied many times to Mueller's prosecutors during the time when they were negotiating a plea. And they say that they discovered that he was leading a secret life, that he was even lying to his own family, in essence, that he had an apartment in London, that he had what he himself, Gates, called a relationship, presumably an affair. And he even said at one point, when they asked, is it possible that, remember, Manafort stepped down from the Trump campaign, Gates stayed on to help with the inauguration. The defense said today, is it possible that you even submitted personal expenses to the Trump campaign? And he said, it's possible.
Interesting. Mimi Rocah, so the prosecution had to do two things today, right? They had to use Rick Gates as their star witness and show, and he's the guy telling them, connecting all the dots. But they also had to hope his credibility withstood cross-examination. How's the prosecution done with their goal of keeping Rick Gates a valuable witness?
I think they've done as well as the prosecution can do in these circumstances. You know, whenever you have a cooperating witness like Rick Gates, namely someone who has committed fraud crimes himself, who has admittedly lied to the government, and who is there because he's a criminal who participated in crimes with the defendant, it's going to be bumpy. You know, during cross-examination, many times I literally wanted to crawl under the table until it was over. You're just kind of holding your breath and hoping that you get through it, you know, with some bumps and bruises, but no major crashes. And it looks like so far that's what's happening. What you don't want on cross-examination is for something to come out that you didn't know about. And I have seen that happen. I've experienced that. So far that hasn't happened here, and that's good. It may sound like a pretty low bar, but, you know, remember, we're going through this in minute detail. At the end of the day, you know, the jury is going to have closing arguments from the prosecutors and from the defense. And the prosecutors are going to try in those arguments to refocus the jury on the evidence and make it about these emails. The email that you put up is a really good email. There was a line at the end of it, though, that wasn't in your visual that said, I thought you had this under control, from Manafort to Gates. If I were the prosecutor, I would hammer that home. It's not just about, I thought you had my tax returns under control. I gave you authority to take care of my finances. So that gives agency. Anything that Gates does is now on Manafort.
Mimi, what is the bar here of proof that you think the prosecution has to pass? Meaning, it looks like Manafort's defense is crimes may have taken place, but he didn't make it. It somehow, he didn't do it on purpose, or he didn't realize it was happening to the degree it was. You know, he's like admitting to some things, but not really. These are paper crimes. These are, I didn't fill out the right forms crimes. First of all, is that what they are? And second, so what? Is that a so what to a jury? Or does the prosecution have to prove that he purposely did this?
Well, I think it depends which charges we're talking about. The bank fraud, for example, I think it's easiest to see sort of how it's not just a paper crime, because you see them, you know, actually falsifying documents and turning income into loans when they're not. And that's much more sort of active, right, than just signing a tax form that's not true. You know, at the end of the day, I think if the jury convicts him on one, they're likely to convict him on all. But at the end of the day, the government probably doesn't care. So, you know, as long as he's convicted on some, he's going to have pretty high sentencing exposure.
You know, go ahead, finish up.
I was just going to say, the other thing is, I think that the judge, you know, the jury will get jury instructions from the judge. And the judge will do a good job of explaining the law is the law. So even if you don't think this may seem like an important crime, signing a tax form that's false, it's still, you know, if you find the facts that he violated it, that's a crime.
All right. You brought up the judge. Pete, I want to ask you, first of all, any dramatic moments today between our friends in the prosecution and Judge Ellis? They seem to be having quite the back and forth, the tears and everything. Yesterday's back and forth read like a humiliation. Did it feel that way when you witnessed it?
No, but Judge Ellis sort of runs hot and cold on that, so maybe this was maybe he was chilling out today. He's still pressing the government to try to get things done as quickly as possible. I should just point out that my colleague Ken Delanian has just come out of the courthouse as things were wrapping up today. Remember, what Gates was trying to do is salvage his credibility as Manafort's lawyers were bringing out this really this pattern of lies and fraud that he's committed over the years that he's now admitted to. And according to what Ken has just told me, he said toward the end, look, I regret what I did, but I've taken responsibility for it. And that's a path that was open to Mr. Manafort, meaning I pleaded guilty. He could have pled guilty, too.
Right.
Now, of course, one thing we did learn today is that, and that this was brought out from questioning by the judge, even though under his guilty plea, Rick Gates could face many years in prison, the government has his lawyers intend to give him basically probation. And the government has written a letter saying if they make that request, the prosecutors will not oppose it. Now, it'll still be up to the judge to sentence him, but that's an enormous concession from the government. It just shows how highly they prize him as a witness.
No, it really does. Pete Williams, thanks very much. Mimi Rocah, would Judge Ellis scare you as a prosecutor right now?
Prosecutors have thick skins. I think you'd have to have a really thick one with Judge Ellis the way he's been. But at the end of the day, it's part of the job.
Yes, it is. All right, Mimi Rocah, former Deputy U.S. Attorney of Southern District of New York, thank you as well. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.